Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Atlanta FaZe did unspeakable things last night to the Toronto Ultra, and Dashy decides to twist the knife even further, revealing that in the warm-up scrims that FaZe played before that Ultra series, they played and warmed up against OpTic Texas, and OpTic put up a far better fight against FaZe in the warm-up scrim than Toronto managed in the official CDL game. Also showing though that when FaZe really want to play well, there is one team they reach out to play. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate, man. What a series that was yesterday. Well, I was hoping for something more competitive, but in its own way it had quite a fair few storylines. Just the confidence on display from FaZe. There's so many parallels with some of the series they used to play back in Cold War, where they were just, you know, they knew they were the best and they were just taking the piss effectively, and they genuinely made Ultra look terrible yesterday. And an Ultra team that might not be great still, okay, now compared to where they were, let's say at Major 1, sure, the map set changes maybe had a part to play in that, but I feel like generally they've just, you know, fallen off or really just haven't kept up with the progress that other teams have made in the way that they might look to have done. And honestly, with FaZe, it was interesting when these maps came into the game, right? Because, okay, they're going to be good at ReeaL. That's just the way the map is designed. But sub-base was not removed, and we discussed it at the time that change was made, that, well, you know what? Keeping, you know, 6-star comes in, of course, and sub-base was not going to be gone. That means that FaZe, their auto veto is still there. But, you know, honestly, even during Cold War and stuff, they wouldn't often play a map like Checkmate, and maybe they're actually still pretty good at sub-base. They think they're probably not terrible at sub-base, but it's just not a good map for them, so therefore they just ban it. They play the rest of them, and on paper, that meant, okay, at least FaZe have still got a map they've got a veto, so the other teams, I'm sure, were kind of happy about that. But the issue is, Vista, 6-star, ReeaL, like these maps, when you've got maps that are kind of mixed like that and Simp and aBeZy are running around, wow, good luck anybody challenging that. Because apart from OpTic, when Pred plays well, I don't think there's an SMG duo that can handle it. HyDra can handle it, but Kismet can't right now. CleanX can handle it 90% of the time. Envoy certainly can't right now. And, you know, Shotzzy and Pred can handle it, but for some reason Pred can't when he plays FaZe. So that is the difficulty with these teams, is that on these maps, Simp and aBeZy are almost always going to play well, and Simp is just the best player in the world right now. Like, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind on that one. So, like, who else can compete? There are very few teams that can even come close to competing, and OpTic is probably the closest. Well, definitely the closest on recent evidence. This, I don't think, is like an entire CDL record. I think it must just be for this season, because I'm sure that people have had more than a 2KD at some point in series in the past, and probably maybe the FaZe guys might be in that category, to be fair. But I think for this year, certainly, that was a series record from Cellium last night, and as Drazah says, basically just, again, talking trash on Scrappy, absolute hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby here. GG's Toronto 1-3-0. Go talk trash to the bottom four to get some confidence, because this is getting boring. And this is what he said to Scrappy after the major, right? When they never played each other, but Drazah was making the point, like, look, Scrap, don't get top 4. Like, come on, come challenge me in the grand finals. But they couldn't make it there. And Drazah's saying, yeah, we're beating everyone so easily. This league is getting kind of boring right now. And even discussed this in the interview, saying, like, they even call it a 3-0 smack down here, the CDL, which is not inaccurate. And as Drazah says, yeah, like, we knew that Simp, aBeZy and Cell were good, but having played with them, they're, you know, even better than maybe they thought that they were. And this was just the immediate reaction. We saw this. Drazah talking trash to the cameras we saw at the start of the video. Scrappy kind of head in hands, because they did not play well in a series where there was some degree of pressure on to perform. These were the numbers if you guys didn't see them last night, and yeah, this is not safe for work. Probably the craziest thing to me about this series was that, sure, Simp had 68 kills, but he had 41 in the control, and a control that only had 4 rounds. So if that had gone round 5, there is a realistic chance, actually pretty plausible chance, that Simp gets 50 in that control. And even then, that 41 kills in map 3 control and invasion was more than CleanX, Envoy and Insights had in the entire series. Only Scrappy had more kills in the whole series than Simp had in that one particular map. So that really just sums it up how yesterday went. And obviously we saw this from Scrappy yesterday. Need to get way better for the major, because it is their home major and they won at the start of the year. That was the same thing that Subliners did last season. They win at the start of the year, they win at the end of the year. It's very difficult to do that, and historically teams that do win at the start of the season will almost certainly fall off. Whether they can get back to that point, it occurs sometimes, although it's very rare that it happens, and Subliners are, you know, last season one of the only examples of that ever happening. There is, I suppose, Team Caliber back in World War II that won at the start of the year, but they made a couple of changes before they got back to the top, and even then they were only second at the World Championship. Before we get to the FaZe OpTic side then, want to discuss Ultra, because Hicksy tweets this out, believe he deleted this one, but he says, crazy. The implication being about the Toronto team, the fact that they dropped Hicksy for Envoy, and look, they won an event with Hicksy last year at Major 3 in Texas, they won it. They won an event this year with Envoy, and on paper, Envoy for Hicksy was an upgrade, right? And I still think that, you know, I don't begrudge them making that decision because I can understand it, and they felt like other teams were improving. They needed to improve as well, and fair play. And they won an event with Envoy at the start of the year. They won an event with Hicksy last year. But since then, has Envoy been, you know, as good as Hicksy was? To be honest, it's interesting for Hicksy. Now, he did get farmed online last year a lot of the time, but on LAN, sure, his numbers still weren't great, but he would often make the correct play. He seemed to be, you know, a player with decent confidence. The guys seemed to trust him, and, well, he seemed to trust himself. Whereas Envoy might be in a bit of a mental spiral right now, because I think we saw it at the Major when he was not playing well in hardpoint, obviously, and his controller was an issue, and then he was like, oh my god, like, okay, the controller's fixed now, but it was in my head, and all these other things. Now, he's come out since the Major, and it's the same story again. And Bsport Josh says, yeah, so Hicksy, unfortunately, doesn't have a 1.2 at least in Europe, so unlucky. But Hicksy says, yeah, on some of these teams, I could have over a 1. Now, you can debate as to whether Ultra would be in any of a different position with Hicksy than Envoy, but the way that Envoy's playing right now, I certainly don't think they'd be any worse than they presently are. So, they're not going to bring Hicksy back, but I just look at some of the SMGs in the league, and I think, are we serious that Hicksy isn't there after getting his one shot in the league last year, turning up to his first ever LAN and winning it? It's like, are we serious? This guy's not getting a spot back. And obviously he had to play a role on the team that was maybe the role that Envoy is currently in, where he's just getting farmed a lot of the time. So therefore, easyMac kind of suggesting, alright, what does the league look like now? Is it simply a big 1, a little 3, and then the other 8, or a big 1, a medium 1, a little 2, and then the other 8? Or, you know, how does this league situate? Because it wasn't long ago we were talking about the top 4, you know, it's a 4-team league and all this, and as I said last night, this makes me believe that by the end of the season, there are going to be one of these top 4 teams at least. Maybe it's New York, probably most likely New York, possibly Toronto Ultra, and maybe OpTic, but one of those teams will be a long way from FaZe at the end of this season, and it's probably going to be New York on current evidence. That is not just a one-man change situation. That is a, like, blow it up type situation. Like, there is a plausible chance that Toronto and New York at the end of this season, and even maybe OpTic think, bloody hell, like, if we want to beat this new FaZe team, we're going to have to, you know, really pack a punch and merge and, you know, try and consolidate talent even further. And I do think the end of the season is going to be very interesting, because there was, you know, a couple of months ago I'd have thought, well, you know, whoever doesn't win champs is going to make some changes. But if it was all quite competitive at champs, and it may still well be, but right now it feels like it's almost a 2-horse race, because there's only one team that gets close to beating FaZe right now. And even they haven't done so, and have a very difficult time potentially doing so. But yeah, Simp says absolute slammage on those guys, and even Kenny was in the replies here to Drazah saying, you know, you love it, you love talking the trash. And FaZe as well now, it's funny how many parallels there are between their season this year and back in Cold War. They've now been on 7 or 2 separate 7 win streaks this year, and I don't know who's going to beat them next. The only team to accomplish that was FaZe back in Cold War. The most recent team to beat FaZe, by the way, was the Los Angeles Guerrillas. Somehow, going into Major 2, I still don't really understand what happens there. But as Drazah even says, the biggest competition is OpTic, but he owns OpTic, at least in his opinion. And I think we need OpTic to lock in, like, right about now. So this is what Dashy has to say, that they warmed FaZe up. So when teams are playing, they will do warm-up scrims. They'll play, you know, 3-4 maps. I'm pretty sure they played 4 maps here, and it was 2-2 between OpTic and FaZe. So Dashy's point was, yeah, Ultra, FaZe warmed up against us, we split maps, we were competitive, they go to play Ultra, and then they slam them like that in 30 minutes.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it, bro. My bad. I'm just setting everything up. Shit, don't mind me. Warmed them up a little too hot. Let's just say the warm-up was a lot more competitive in that match. A lot more.
What was especially interesting here, actually, is that Dashy revealed, and it kind of went on to be said, that the previous time I think they'd warmed up FaZe was the last time FaZe played Ultra. So it seems to me that whenever FaZe have a series that they really want to win, or believe that, you know, they need a good warm-up to beat, let's say Toronto, because Drazah wants to beat Scrappy, as we all know, that's when they warm up against OpTic, and, you know, those warm-up scrims are competitive, then they play Ultra and absolutely slam them. And the last 2 times they played Ultra, it's been 3-0s both times. The first time wasn't as bad as this last night, but it was still pretty bad. And it's now, 3-0, 3-0 the last couple of times they've played. And I think both times they warmed up against OpTic. So that tells something about the way that FaZe perceive OpTic. And yes, OpTic have not beaten them so far. They should have beaten them in the series they played on the first weekend. They had plenty of chances to close out in those moments. They didn't do so. So, you know, OpTic are still a level behind, but they're definitely a level ahead of the competition. I feel like this is probably about right as it stands on the tier list that Scrim, Intel and Roddy puts together here, because, yeah, I wouldn't drop Ultra or Subliners down further than this, even though New York, I would say, are somewhat on the precipice if they continue to lose to teams that they should be better than. But yeah, it's gone from being a top 4 to all of a sudden a very clear dynamic at the top of the league. And I don't know if New York have what it takes to get back there. I think that Ultra potentially do, but they are going to need to find some confidence from somewhere. And Envoy individually is certainly going to have to, because these are the standings so far. It's still looking fine. But even in terms of, like, you know, map win-loss and stuff, sure, when you play FaZe, it's never necessarily going to look so pretty. But OpTic was 6-0 last weekend. They're the team that can get closest to FaZe, and they've got what it takes within them. We know that Karma's been talking about this, that, sure, Pred has not played his best COD when they've played FaZe recently. If that can change, it could be a different story. But right now, FaZe are just extending their advantage at the top of the league. These are the CDL standings, and all of a sudden, there's quite the discrepancy here. Like, Rocker at 110. Wow. I mean, Boston, it honestly, yesterday was bad for Boston. This is why I was so kind of animated on Pentagrxm making those mistakes, because that was just such a must-win series, and to throw it away in the way that they did in that Game 5 was so criminal, because they're now 30 points behind Miami, Thieves, and even 40 points behind Gorillas. Like, that's a lot of ground to make up. They can do it, but right now, I just don't see it happening, right? They're 40 points behind the World Championship qualification spots, and they're just falling behind lots of their rivals. Minnesota moved to 110, so they're still 5th somehow in the league. New York Subliners at 190, so I think a poor Major 1 paid to some of their numbers. But it doesn't feel like that long ago that the top 4 were relatively close. Now, it's Subliners, it's OpTic and Ultra, which are pretty much tied nowadays, and, well, I might expect that to go the other way soon. And then FaZe are pulling a bit of a gap. They're now 22-4 this season, which is incredibly comparable to what they were back in Cold War, for example. So it's a very similar season trajectory we are seeing, and potentially a very similar result at the end of it, because the way that it currently stands, the confidence that FaZe have, the way that this map set just seems to work so well with those guys. There's only one team that seems capable of doing it, and that is actually the one team that hasn't beaten FaZe, because Ultra beat FaZe earlier on in the season, so did New York. OpTic haven't beaten them, but right now they are no doubt the closest team to doing so, and Dashy certainly seems to believe that's the case as well. And OpTic also recently, you know, beat Toronto at the major, beat the Subliners at the major, so it's quite clear what the CDL standings are. The question really remains if we want to have competitive majors from the rest of the season, and FaZe aren't just going to win everything, which they very much could the way they're presently looking. Is OpTic getting the job done? I guess the good thing for OpTic fans is that all of a sudden it feels like, well, you know, it's no longer a 4-horse race for, you know, the grand finals. It's almost like FaZe OpTic is going to be a very consistent trend of the grand finals, and maybe eventually they're going to get a victory there. But yeah, remarkable turn of events. Very much interested your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.